From the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. The Broncos have their head coach in place in Sean Payton, and now he's going about putting his staff together. We know right now, Ben, Zach Strief is going to be the offensive line coach, but we don't know who the defensive coordinator coach is going to be. So, per Mike List, they have interviewed 6 candidates to be the defensive coordinator. One among them, by the way, Rex Ryan, the former New York Jets coach. But it's all sorts of different styles of defense, and I think that's kind of an interesting conversation here.
Yeah, and they've looked at some younger guys, some guys with experience, different things. The Rex Ryan name was kind of an eye opener, but I think he's probably feet behind everybody else in the race.
I see what you did
there. Mike Zimmer is someone that could potentially be in play there. A lot of this has to do with John Gannon finally getting the Arizona job, and some of the people that would be potentially on that staff or people the Broncos would be interested in. Sean Desai, does he go down there? Nick Rollis. There are names in this that are still in a state of flux. So once that kind of settles down, we'll go from there. I will say this: Sean Payton, not traditionally a guy who hires young guys to be coordinators and put in executive positions. He usually likes to groom them, start them at the assistant coach position, move them up. So I would suggest that the Rollis stuff is probably a little less likely. My gut says Desai or Zimmer winds up as the Broncos defensive coordinator, but we'll see on that.
Yeah, right. So Desai, Zimmer, Rex Ryan, Christian Parker,
the defensive backs coach.
DB's coach got an interview.
He's an up-and-comer. I think he's probably a year or two away from being a defensive coordinator somewhere, but everybody wants a piece of that because of the work that he's done with guys.
It certainly seems like that interview is an intent for the organization, who has really liked Christian Parker for a long time, to try to keep him.
Well, you hire him away, and the Broncos are going to get draft picks. So leaking that name out there and getting run for it, it certainly helps the Broncos out either way. So
that's a good point. You always do a good job getting 2 steps ahead when I'm still like, but what do you think about the idea of that, about, promoting him from within? And you're like, yeah, there's a reason. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, good call.
I don't think Christian Parker is, I like Christian Parker. I don't think at this point in time he's a candidate for defensive coordinator, a serious one. You know what I mean? I do believe that he will be a defensive coordinator in this league. I do believe he'll be a very bright one. But right now, I think he's still a year or two out.
Now, you mentioned Sean Desai, and that interview took place week plus ago. I mean, we're talking a little while ago, along with the interview with Brian Flores that all took place, I think, during the bye week of the Super Bowl. So interesting that name is still out there. Do we read into that situation by the fact that he hasn't chosen the Broncos? As you said, he was waiting to see sort of the dust clear on all the other
He's
hirings.
waiting to see the dust clear on this other stuff, and I do think it'll come down to Arizona or Denver for Sean Desai. So we'll see how that shakes out. I do think there's a scenario in which Arizona gets Desai as defensive coordinator, puts Rollis as like a linebackers coach, but gives him the assistant head coach title on top of it. They play the title game with him. So I think there's those kinds of scenarios. We'll see. But my gut says that Zimmer and Desai are the two in place here. No, the Vic Fangio thing I think is dead. Even though he has not signed his contract down in Miami as of this recording, I think if he were to leave Miami for any team, it'd be Philadelphia. But I don't necessarily. I do think it's dead here in Denver.
Okay. Chris Richard's another name that we need to make sure we mention.
Right.
Was on the Saints staff.
Feels like that's the fallback option. Just based on some conversations, he's a guy who's not really had a lot of success as a defensive coordinator, has been moved on rather quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't clicked for him all of a sudden now, but certainly has had some philosophical differences with the people that he's been hired with, and so that's going to be interesting to see. I do believe he's going to be on this staff either way, but I think he's the fallback in terms of defensive coordinator.
Okay, so what I think is interesting about this, and I said at the very beginning, is it sort of paints a picture of the kinds of coaches that they're looking for, but it's still intriguing to me because what Sean Desai, coming off of the Vic Fangio coaching tree, versus what Rex Ryan are trying to do seem to be polar opposites as far as philosophical view.
Yeah, despite the feed joke about Rex Ryan, he is a long shot. I don't think that he's actually. I think that was a favor. His twin brother Rob was Sean Payton's defensive coordinator for 3 years in New Orleans. I think that was more of a favor. Guy who's in media getting his name back out there. Oh, he's still in play for coaching jobs. In case somebody comes a calling at some point. And that happens quite a bit. I don't think he's a serious candidate. I don't believe that he's going to get this job. What he brings to the table philosophically is almost a polar opposite of what this team is geared to run. And so I don't feel like that's a good fit. I don't think that's the direction they're going.
So is there any, in your opinion, any view of this where you are looking for some continuity, at least philosophically, from what you've been? Because it seemed like the hire of Ejiro Evero was in part to bring along somebody that saw things similar to the way Vic Fangio had installed him. You wanted to bring more pressure, and he certainly wasn't the sort of bring as few people as possible and sit back. But the thing about it is you've been running a 3-4, predominantly a 3-4, and now we're talking about possibly coaches that want to come in and mix things up a little bit.
Yeah, Evero was brought in because he was Nathaniel Hackett's best friend dating back to college. Now, just because he happened to be, multiple and have experience and kind of be the guy that can run that defense and provide some continuity, I think that was a selling point, but that wasn't the primary motivating factor there. In terms of who you can bring in, Desai does bring some continuity. Rallis, not so much. And Zimmer, not really. I mean, Zimmer's famous for the double A gap. That's kind of his thing. Is putting six guys at the line of scrimmage, and then you're teasing that you're shooting the A gap with a kind of a wide 9 look, and then doubling up the linebackers over the center. That's an interesting look, and that would be an interesting setup for this Broncos team. I mean, because at that point you could kind of put Baron Browning there instead of off the edge and move him around a little bit.
But Flores would flirt with that sort of stuff too.
Yeah, he did a little bit. Although Flores was a little more just heavy. He was more in the Rex Ryan, Wade Phillips, bring the house kind of.
But he liked some of those maybe defenses where he'd bring somebody up into the gaps and then he'd move them back. And he played a lot of games that way. Yeah,
Zimmer likes to sugar the A gaps and run too high. That's kind of his thing, and that fits what the Broncos have done. So it's more of a fit, I think. And then Parker. I don't know what Christian Parker would run. I mean, we've seen his work here as an assistant, but we don't know what his philosophy is.
Yeah, so that is going to be kind of fascinating. And again, a lot of this, I imagine for Sean Payton, is about fit. It's really about what can I get on the defensive side of the ball, because I think I'm not too worried so much about what he's going to figure out on the offensive side of the ball. You've talked about several of the names that you could see, several former Saints employees, Joe Lombardi, a guy that's out there being one of those examples. But on the defense is more intriguing to me, because I think for the way that this thing is going to work is, hey, Sean Payton's going to have a lot on his plate with the offensive side of the ball. He's obviously spent a lot of time as a head coach. He can manage both, but the point is, on the defense, he needs somebody that he can lean on and trust that can be almost an assistant coach in this respect.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's part of the reason he wanted Vic Fangio in the first place was, he knows that there's a core competency there and that he can handle that. Some of these guys that you potentially hire don't have that experience. Rallis doesn't, Parker doesn't. Zimmer, you can trust in that regard. I think Sean Desai showed enough in his season up there in Chicago. So I think you can trust those guys. Then beyond that, it really just is a question of, do I have the faith that these guys can get it done and hold their own on that side of the ball while I work on the other side of the ball?
How critical should I view this, or should we view this? Because I think there's a little bit of it's going to be fine because the offense is going to be much better, and how much of a drop-off are we really expecting in the defense? I tried to make the argument on KOA the other day that this is a much bigger deal than is probably being given time to. But I got a little bit of pushback from Alfred Williams. So where do you feel about it?
I think that here's the other part of this, and the part that we're not talking about is that there's a bit of a on the defensive side, the defensive coordinators coming in, there's a bit of a lose-lose setup here. Because if you come in and you do well on defense, everybody's going to say, well, they already had a great defense. You did it because of the players. And if you do poorly, everyone's going to blame you for the defense taking a step back. So that's the other reason I think that some people are potentially hesitant to take this job. It's already stacked. You've had 2 defensive coordinators come in here and run it really well in Vic Fangio and then Ejiro Evero. And so now, if you come in and you want to make changes to this thing, you're going to get blamed if it tanks. And so there is kind of a cautious element to that. I do think the defense is poised for a little bit of a step back in some regards, but I think they could be poised for a breakout in others.
Especially you get the offense pulling their weight.
Well, you had a lot of injuries along the edge. The edge rush this past year. Randy Gregory, Jake Martin, all those guys. There was a lot of injuries along that. If you can just keep that healthy, and all of a sudden you're getting sacks out of this defense on top of everything else, then you might be in for a special year.
Right. But again, having the support of the offense, having the ability to pass rush with a lead possibly, that's significant. And it changes a lot of ways that they've been wanting to play. I mean, the whole point of bringing Russell Wilson in, the entire offseason conversation last year was about, hey, what can this defense do if they really have the benefit of complementary football? And they did not get that. They did not get that, and yet they still put up some pretty impressive numbers.
Yeah, I mean, an offense that can keep them off the field a little more, make them fresher down the stretch might be more beneficial. Certainly being able to get after the quarterback in obvious pass situations. If teams are playing from behind, they're going to put guys like Surtain or Justin Simmons in line for even more interceptions. Justin led the league with 6 last year, despite playing only, 12 games, something like that. So it could put those guys who are in the primes of their careers, Surtain really just getting started in his, firmly in the spotlight.
All right, looking forward to what's next. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight.
Denver's going to win it! You can stand up and salute in Denver, and you got the world champions that live in your town.